So you get pretty intimate with these people, that's a tough time maybe in their life. And,
Yes.
So how do you, stay neutral? I mean, I imagine some of these get heated or...
Yes. So it's interesting. Maintaining neutrality is not hard because as we navigate our days,
Right.
there's two perspectives. Some people think a gray, rainy day is so beautiful.
Right.
Like people in Sitka, Alaska.
Yeah.
When I went there, it was a beautiful, sunny, 70-degree day, and Alaskans were apologizing to me for this horrible, beautiful, sunny weather. So as we navigate our world, we always have two perspectives. And in mediation, we always have two perspectives. The parties will always have two perspectives. Doesn't mean anyone is lying
Right.
or wrong. It just means there are two perspectives. So it's much easier to maintain neutrality than I ever thought it would be. The hard part is dealing with the emotions.
Right.
As lawyers, we're not trained to deal with emotions, but as mediators, we are.
Oh, interesting.
So mediation should never look like a therapy session, but we do acknowledge emotions in mediation.
Right.
So if somebody's very angry or very frustrated, we'll talk about that, because if we ignore the emotion, we cannot move past that knot of emotion.
Right.
We need to untie the knot so we can move forward to discuss the issues.
Wow.
So mediation, it's interesting. I thought neutrality would be hard for me. It's
Right.
not at all. The emotions, I absorb, and a lot of mediators will absorb the emotions.
Right.
So sometimes I let the parties just throw the emotion at me
Oh,
instead of
interesting.
at each other.
Right.
So it's very interesting.
Wow. So with the emotions and acknowledging, are you just saying like you seem mad, or is that how you're acknowledging it? Or you walk me through that?
So communication is usually an issue in every single mediation, whether it's a business mediation, a small claims mediation, whether it's a family mediation community. Communication always seems to be an issue.
Right.
And sometimes people get very frustrated when they have trouble communicating with each other. So I may say, help me understand how you feel about this. It seems that you're pretty frustrated with the communication piece.
Right.
So we'll break down what the frustration is. And mediators paraphrase and summarize quite a bit in mediation to make sure that everybody in mediation feels heard.
Right.
If people are repeating things over and over, it means either that they don't feel heard and acknowledged,
Right.
or it may mean that they're stuck in the past. Sometimes we call it the chaos of the past. So my job is to paraphrase, summarize, acknowledge emotion, meet them where they are in the present.
Right.
If we talk about the past, we're going to acknowledge that, but we don't want to keep them stuck in the past.
Right.
We want to meet them in the present and move them forward.
Right. Right.
So that's what I see my job as.
Yeah, my sister and I call it the loop. Like you
Yes.
keep saying the same thing, and
Yes.
or you may be saying the same thing to each other, but you're just in the loop.
Yes. And so sometimes if people keep saying the same things to each other,
Right.
they need to, and I'll put this on the board, I'll say to party one, what do you think party two is feeling? I'll
Oh.
put that on the board.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say to party two, what do you think party one is feeling? And oftentimes, not only are they not identifying what the other person is feeling, they're having trouble identifying what they themselves are feeling.
Oh, interesting.
And so once we have this talk about emotions, and we identify the emotions, and we've had this discussion, it's a lot easier to communicate.
Right.
And people have trouble communicating. I don't know if it's that a lot of us didn't take classes in communication. You know, in law school we took evidence, we took tax, we took corporations. We didn't really take classes in communication. And in high school I don't really remember taking a communications class. So I think a lot of people are uncomfortable communicating.
Mm-hmm.
Practice makes things easier. So
Right.
we do a lot of practicing communication in mediation.
Yeah. Right. And so in any kind of dispute, is it just the two or the parties that are in the dispute that are in the room? I mean, I know you mentioned that there wasn't, like a, what did you were talking about?
Divorce financial neutral.
Or the attorneys or whatever. But so, I mean, are there any other parties, like is there ever like an advocate for the child that sits in the mediation, or that's all separate?
I haven't had that in my private cases, but in my actually I have. I have had a stepmom sit in on a mediation.
Oh, okay.
And I have had a clergy person sit in on a mediation.
Oh, interesting.
And the stepmom was very, very helpful in one case, not helpful in another case.
Okay.
The clergy person, who I thought would be so helpful, unfortunately was not helpful in any way.
Wow.
And so typically, if someone's going to ask, could I have someone come in for support, we talk about that.
Right.
And if both parties feel it's a good idea, then that will happen. That happens more in my court-referred cases.
Okay.
If someone feels that a boyfriend or an attorney, for
Right.
sure,
Yeah.
or a friend. So we always like to make sure people feel really safe and comfortable in mediation.
Right.
So I would say it's more likely that in a court-referred case in DC courts that I would have people come in because they all come into the mediation suite together, kind
Right.
of as a group of people.
Yeah.
And so again, we'll talk about it, and if both parties agree, we'll bring in people, make sure everyone's comfortable. In my private mediations, it happens less frequently, but if people ask, absolutely, we'll talk about it. We want to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable
Right.
in discussing conflict. And it's really important the first 5 minutes when you meet with new clients in the mediation room. It's really important to set the tone so you're making them feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do that, we have what's called intake calls.
Okay.
So when someone finds me, and often people find me online or through word of mouth,
Mm-hmm.
they call me, and I have separate and confidential intake calls where I give them the opportunity to ask all about mediation, how I work with clients, to make sure they're very comfortable.
Right.
But when we all get in the room after the intake calls, maybe a week or two later,
Yeah.
it's really important to set the tone so that people feel comfortable. And then people really like mediation, but when they're walking in, most people have never been part of a mediation before.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't really know what to expect. And so my job is to make them feel comfortable, put them at ease.
Right. And so, are there any, like, in an abusive, if there, I'm sure there's situations where there's maybe abuse or whatever. I mean, are there any times where you ever felt afraid for one of the parties? I know that you do these intake calls and things like that, but I know sometimes people aren't always
Right.
forthright with certain
That's right.
things.
So there were a couple of cases I actually referred to an attorney because I felt that the playing field would not be level.
Right.
I was uncomfortable with what I was hearing
Yeah.
in the confidential intake calls, and I felt mediation was not the best avenue for them.
Right.
In mediation, I would say I'm pretty careful that I wouldn't take a case if I felt that there was abuse. Having said that, in DC courts, sometimes if there is an abuse situation and there's a caseworker and case manager
Right.
who's aware of it, then they may mediate in separate rooms, and mediation can be very effective. But there is a long list of questions
Right.
that the case manager would ask to make sure that this is a case that would be suitable for mediation.
Okay.
You want to make sure that neither party feels intimidated,
Right.
and that both parties feel that mediation would be voluntary and mediation would not be, one party didn't feel pressured to come
Right.
up with an agreement. So luckily that's more in the hands of the case manager
Mm-hmm.
or the caseworker.
So that may be like a delineation if there's something that's like they're not mutually agreeing, or there's sort of this power play that that may be better suited for an attorney. Are there any other things or specifics where if people are getting divorced or they have a business relationship that's falling apart or something that you would say, you know, these 3 questions you can ask yourself, and if so, then, you know, you might be better suited for this versus mediation, or is it a little bit more fluid than that?
I would say that another example, because I think any dispute can be handled through mediation.
Right.
It's a wonderful collaborative, cooperative process. Having said that, let me give you an example. In a divorce case where one party has come to me for mediation, they've sought me out,
Yeah.
and that party is very adversarial and combative, almost maybe a narcissistic personality
Right.
type where, you know, it's
Have you
all.
met those?
I have met those. I have met those. Having said that, all of us can be difficult, right? Situationally, strategically, difficult personalities. But this is beyond that realm of difficult personality. This is narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And some of us do have personality disorders.
Yeah.
We are high functioning, we are good looking, we are charming, we're really smart, and we have personality disorders.
Right.
And so sometimes when people have sought me out and they say, look, I'm adversarial, I'm going to win at all costs, and I explain what mediation is, that might not be a good candidate for mediation. That might be a good candidate for hiring the best shark of a lawyer you can and fighting it out if you really want to spend up to $100,000 per party to fight it out and to have this drag on for 3 years. And if that's their idea of fun, you go for it. Because that's not how I like to work with people. I like to be very transparent about costs. I like to save my clients money because they are pretty stressed out about money. And so I'm very clear with them about how we're going to work together. I draft session notes after each mediation session, and I'll say to them, this is what I do, because they're not minutes, but they are organized by issue. And after each session, you'll know what you agreed to, what you put on the shelf, what you agreed to come back to. And I like to do that because it's helpful to write up the agreement. Having said that, if we've talked for 2 hours about whether a couple's in love in a marriage mediation, it's not really helpful to do session notes. And so I'll be transparent. I'll say, I don't think it's necessary. And so I'll save them the money that way. And it's always up to them, whatever they think is a good idea.
I would defer those adversarial, like, win at all costs, maybe to CrossFit. I have a few, or some exercise program.